Okay, this is Greg Hughes from 90-Second Website Builder, and today I'm going to talk about forms. Brace yourself because this video might run a little bit long. We get asked about forms a lot, and it's slightly advanced, so this video is going to go into some detail. But once you see how it works, it'll all make sense. So we're working with the form controls today. Form controls. A form is, of course, an area on a website that allows you to place objects that capture data, capture information like name, address, comments, any kind of information that somebody would type into a field or a form, so that that data or that form can be submitted to you, the website owner. In order to make a form, the first thing you need to do is to make a form area. That's this grayed out box area that I just drug onto the canvas. So this is going to be my form. So that means all of my form elements, they're called controls, need to go into this gray box in order to work, so they stay within the right code behind the scenes. Now there's a lot of different controls. Some of them are more advanced than others, and I'll talk about some of the more common ones here just to make sure this video stays succinct and helpful. The most common form control you're going to use is called the edit box. This is a control where you might use for somebody to submit their name. So I just drug that out into the form area, as you can see, and it's just simply a field. Let's double click on that field to see what I can do with it. The first thing I can do, of course, is name it something. Now, right now it's called edit box 1, but let's say I'm going to use this field to allow somebody to submit their first name. So let's just call it first name. Now, the only person that's ever going to see this is me as the website owner, you, because this is how it's going to come to you, which we'll talk about in a minute. So you'll know what field this represents. An initial value might mean, I could put something in here that says, please type your first name here, and that'll appear in the field until they replace it. But normally we wouldn't do that with this kind of a field. So I'm going to leave that blank. I can set the maximum length if I want to. In the case of a name, I'll leave it unlimited. If this were a password field, I'd want to select yes, because then as people fill in a password field, it encrypts it. Sometimes it puts little dots or bullets or asterisks to make sure it's safe, but this is not going to be a password field, so we don't want that feature. Now, the rest of the stuff is going to be advanced. I'm going to skip some of the advanced stuff so that you can just make an easy form from watching this video. So I'm going to skip some of that. The Style tab is also going to be very generic in that this is common for all 90-Second Website Builder objects. You can always adjust the style, so I won't go into detail on how to do that, but just know that you can adjust the color and the background and the borders and the fonts and all the things that are supposed to go with style you can do with every form control. Events is advanced programming. For those of you that understand that, you can go into that. That's another video. Validate's great. Validate is where I can decide if I want this field to have certain requirements in order for it to work. As you can see right now, this field has no constraints. Means they can just type in whatever they want. But I might want to say, I want to make sure this field always has text. So make sure it's text and no numbers. And if it's not filled in correctly, I want them to see an error message. So I could create an error message that says, must be text or whatever. And this would require the user to make sure they use text when they fill in this form. So I can create these certain validation rules. I can even decide the length of this field. It has to be at least so many characters long and no more than so many. I can put in the maximum. Or I can make sure that the field has to match the value of another field somewhere that maybe I have chosen. And there would be a list of fields here. Anyway, you can decide all of these validation rules if you want to. In the case of just somebody's name, it's a good idea just not to have any constraints. So for now, I'm just going to say no constraints. I just want you to know that the constraints are there. In some cases, it's very handy. Somebody's filling in a date and you want it to be in a certain format, you would require that here, or whatever you want. If it has to be a number, you can do that here. So let's leave this. In this case, we'll leave the name field with no constraints. So here I simply have a very simple field called first name, and it's the first element or the first control in my form area. Now it's not labeled yet. You'll notice it doesn't say name anywhere because I haven't done that yet. We'll simply use the regular text tool to do that later. Let's make another one though, just like this. I'm going to get the edit box and let's make another one. And let's make this be maybe where somebody would submit their email address. So I'm going to double click on that. And let's call this email. Again, this is something that only I will see eventually. I can make a maximum length, usually not required for an email address. Do I want to validate this? Yeah, maybe that'd be a good idea. Make sure it's a valid email address. So I can say, you know, this must be an email address. So let's put a custom message right there, and that requires it just to be filled out correctly. I can even, if I wanted to, I could say a minimum of 6 characters or whatever, but it's not really necessary. Just know that you have the ability to do that. Okay, let's say that we've got our name, we've got our email, and we could do several other things. And I'll just do this very quickly. We can use checkboxes. A checkbox allows my user to check a box to make a selection. So maybe next to this box, I would put an option, say small. I want, or option number 1, or whatever the choice is I want them to make, or whatever this value is, I would put a field here, and then I would decide inside this checkbox what that value means. So in other words, when I get the information as the website owner, I'm going to want to know whether or not they checked this box. So we'll keep it, let's call it checkbox 1. And if they check the box and I get the form, then the value I'm going to see is that checkbox 1 has the value of on. Or I can say it this way. Let's just make a practical example here. Let's say I'm giving them the option to say, yes, send me more info, okay? If they check this box, then I know they've said yes to me. So what I might do is call this the yes box. Again, I'm the only one that will see that, and I'll make the value be yes because that's what it means when they check it. It's initially unchecked. I can make it initially checked if I want, so that when the form opens up, they would have to uncheck it. See, looks like that. In most cases, you're going to want to leave it initially unchecked. So now when the form comes to me, I'm going to see their first name, value, whatever they type into the field. I'm going to see their email address, whatever they type into the field. And I'm going to see whether or not they checked the box. Another way to get information is to use what's called a radio button. Radio buttons are good for multiple selections. Let's say I'm selling something, and let's make a few of these. Let's make another radio box right here, and I want them to choose one of 3. Okay? And I won't take the time to make all of these, but I won't make them really pretty right now, just so you can see. You want to straighten these or use the alignment feature up here. Let's say I wanted to have them make a selection, and again, I'll use the text tool to say small, medium. I'm just going to use these as an example so you can see what multiple selections will look like, and large. Now, radio buttons are good because they can be grouped together, and as long as these radio buttons are all in the same group, then only one of them can be selected at a time. Here's how that works. I'm going to double click, and I can name this group whatever I want to call it. Let's call it radio button group 1. And the value means small. If they check this one, the value they chose was small. Again, this is information that I will see when it's sent to me. Do the same thing for this one. Again, it needs to be part of radio group 1 in order to be part of the same group. And if they check this button, they chose medium. I'll need to know that when the form is submitted. We'll do the same thing here, make sure it's part of the same group, and let's call this one large. So now when this form is used, the user will only be able to check one of these 3. These will toggle. That's different than a checkbox. A checkbox is either on or off, but here they will only be able to check one of the options within that group. So without going into further detail, let me just show you a couple of other form tools you can use. We could also use what's called a file upload field. I'm going to talk to you about this because you need to know how dangerous of a tool this is. Let me tell you what I mean. It's actually possible to put a field in a form that allows your user to upload a file to your hosting account. Now you might say, why would you want to do that? Well, in most cases you wouldn't, because you don't want the general public just being able to upload files and through your server and putting them on your account. So this is a field you want to be very careful with. You would only use this in a very protected area of your website that only certain people have access to. This would be a very this would be extreme vulnerability if you don't use it correctly. But just know that there are applications for when people would need to upload something to your server and send it to you. And again, there are all the validation tools available for that. I'm going to remove this for now. It's just in our example. I want you to know it's there. A combo box is similar to a list box. Here we could say we're giving the user a selection, so a multiple selection. So this would be a good use for, let's say, I want to give them the ability to choose a state that they live in, right? So I would add California, and let's, or I would, do you live in California? Do you live in Oregon? Do you live in Washington? Now, there's a difference between what the item is called, the item text, what they see. This is what the user will see, and this is the value that I will get when the form is selected. So I won't do all 50 states. The video is going too long already. I can call this combo box whatever I want. Well, let's call it states. And I can call it a combo box or a list box, very little difference. I can allow multiple selections. In this case, they're only going to be from one state, so I'll leave it like that. And here we basically have a field that will pull down to multiple selections and submit that particular data to me. Now, the only thing missing from my form, there's two things missing. One are all the labels. I've got some labels here, but I would need to put a label called name, email, and states. I won't do that for the sake of time. But there's one other thing, and that's the submit button, the one thing that we need for them to send this form on to us. So we would just take a push button tool. We would drag it here. Just defaults to the name submit, but I can change that. I can call that whatever I want, because this is, again, only I would see this. But the label they would see on the form, submit my info, they'll see that on the form, and we'll just leave it at that. You can see it's called submit my info. I can change it like this. So now my form's ready to go. Almost. Again, assume I have these labels here. Now it's time to program the form. Don't get scared because I said the word program. This is great. 90-second does all the work for you. What I'm now going to do is just select the form area. None of the objects in the form, but the form area. This grayed out area here is what is selected. I double click and I bring up my options. Now, there are basically two ways for you to have this form submitted to you. The default way is the way it comes up now. Under the General tab, you'll see that you can name the form, and this doesn't matter. The name of the form really doesn't matter. You're the only one that will ever see that. Make it something sensible. Contact form, address, feedback, whatever you want to call it. This is the email address that the information on this form will be mailed to. And that's basically all you have to do if you want to use this method of form submission. What will happen if I click OK and I use this form on my website? What will happen is when the user comes and fills out the information and they click submit, they will then be brought to their own email client. Their Outlook or their email program would then pop up. It would open up an email. It would fill in all of the information in the message of that email. It would put in their first name, their email, whether or not they checked this box, whether they chose small, medium, or large, the state they chose. It would basically write an email and send it to me. It would come to this address. Now, that's not the best way to send information, because what you're doing is you're requiring your website visitor to click on a button that opens up their email client. It's a safe way to do it because you're not going through your server. However, it's not the common way to do it. I just want you to know that it's there. For those of you that have legitimate hosting accounts that allow you to use PHP, and if you don't have a host that allows you to use PHP, you should change hosts. The best way to do it is to check this box right here, to use the form processing with the PHP form processor. You'll notice that when I checked this box, this part was grayed out. This is already filled in for me. I can still name the form whatever I want to call it. Here I would fill in, again, my email address where I want this form to be submitted. I can also have it carbon copied to another email address of mine or blind carbon copied somewhere. But this decides where the form information will come. It will then allow me to decide what that email looks like when it comes to me. So the subject of this email, which again, I'll be the only one that reads it, when the form is submitted, I'll get an email with a subject line that says website form, or I can put in here somebody submitted information, or here's another order, or whatever I want to tell myself when this email comes to me. And then the message of the email is determined by the values from the form. So in other words, the message part of the email, where somebody would normally write their message, what's going to be contained in there are all of the values that were filled out in the form. Basically, the user is just going to fill out the form, click submit, and this information will come to me in my email. So then what happens to the user after they click submit? Well, in this case, what they do, they're taken to a success page, which you decide. Here I would type in mydomain.com/thank you or whatever, or I would select a page from my project. So if I had a thank you page, I would select that and we'd go from there. This success page is very important because it's the only thing your user will see. They'll fill out a form, they'll click submit, and they'll land on this success page. And the success page basically would tell them, thanks, you've submitted your information, someone will get back to you as soon as possible, blah, 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 depending on how you want to do that. You can even make an error page in case they don't fill out the form correctly that says, hey, you didn't fill it out correctly, go back and try again. So nothing could be easier. I realize I've said a lot, but really, 90-Second Website Builder is doing all of this work for you. All you've done so far is check this box. Decide what email address you want to get the form at, decide the subject of that email you're going to be getting, and then make sure there's a thank you page or a success page for your visitor to go to once they've submitted that information. Okay, now I realize this video is very long and it's a little bit intricate, but I'm going to show you a cool trick. For all of the things that I just described to you, 90-Second makes it even easier than that. And here's how we'll do it. I'm going to delete this form. All my hard work is gone because what I'm going to do now is use the Form Wizard. And the Form Wizard is a great tool that does all of the things we just talked about. First of all, it allows me to create a form based on a number of templates that are built into 90-Second. So in other words, I don't have to sit there and design all the little fields and buttons that I need. I can start with a template. Here's a template called Business Contact, and as you can see, it will have a number of fields, combo boxes, radio buttons, edit boxes, all these things. Or I might want a real simple comments form. This is just one field and a couple of buttons. Here's a simple contact form, just name and email. Here's one that's got a full name and address. There's other forms, and some of them become advanced. Here's a dictionary lookup form. Here's a form processor you would use if you aren't able to use PHP. If you're on a different kind of a server that uses what's called ASP, usually a Windows-based server. Most people are not. Most people are on Unix servers, and you would use PHP. But this is for those rare cases where you're using this kind of a processor. Or GoDaddy, if you host with GoDaddy, they have another protocol you might need to use that's built into here, and there's some other protocols. There's a template for PayPal buttons, so that you can just make your PayPal shopping cart more complex if you want to. There's an RSVP form, just some ideas, and there's a bunch of them, as you can see. Forms that search Google Maps, forms that search Wikipedia, forms that search Google or other search engines. Here's a support form where somebody would fill that out and give you information so you can provide support. Just a feedback form. Basically, these are just some ideas on forms. So let's pick a simple one so you can see what happens. Contact us. Here's a basic, name and address type of a form. And you'll see what happens when I click next. It shows me all of the objects or controls in the form. I can edit them if I want to, simply by clicking here. Or I can continue on and just decide how I want this form processed. Here I name the form, something that only I'll see. The form processor I want to use, again, is the built-in PHP form processor. All I have to tell 90-Second is the address I want it sent to. I also can tell it the subject line of the message I'll get, and I can move on. So I'm all done, except watch what happens. When I click finish, you can see that I have my form all made here. I'm going to double click out here in the form area, and let's look and see what it did for me. Again, we used the PHP form processor. Here's our subject called contact information. Again, I can always edit this stuff. It's going to pick up the values from the form itself. I can create a success page so that my user will land somewhere after they click submit, which would be a very important thing to do so they don't get confused. And that's it. And we're basically done. And this form is ready to use. Couple of things I want to show you before we close this video. You'll notice in the form properties there was a little thing here called hidden fields. A hidden field is an object that you can put into the form that the user does not see. This can be like a little flag or a little message to yourself, basically, and you can put as many of these as you want to. That just lets you know something about this form. You might say, oh, this is the form that came from a certain page on a website or a certain product that it's referring to. It's just a message to send yourself when the form arrives in your email that you don't want the user to see, and you can put an unlimited number of hidden fields. They're very common, actually, with forms. Also, you can style the form itself, just like you can style all the buttons in the fields. You can also style the form with colors and grids and borders and all that good stuff. You can also, there's some events, as always, advanced programming. But here's something a little bit advanced, but for those of you who are familiar with MySQL, instead of just submitting the form through the server to an email that you would receive, you also have the ability to send this data to a MySQL database. Now, before I lose you, this will not apply to you. If you don't want to use a MySQL database, it's fine. Just ignore this part of the video. But for those of you who want the form submitted to a database, which would be very handy, all you'll need to know to do is to know the name of the server, the name of the database, the name of the table, and the username and password for that MySQL database. That's slightly advanced, and I can't go into it in this video because it'd go on even longer. But for those of you that understand how MySQL works, just know that 90-second makes it very simple for you to submit that form to a database. For the rest of you who aren't going to be doing that, you can leave this unchecked, and everything is just basically a matter of processing through the PHP processor. And all you're really doing is checking this box, telling it the email address you want to receive that data, and the subject and message, etc. One more thing to do, and we're completely done, and that is, before this will work, before I can even preview it or upload it to my server, I have to make sure that I change the kind of page that this is. In other words, you'll almost always be building HTML pages when you're working with 90-second website builder. HTML or HTM, same thing. But when you're working with forms, you need to make sure that this page is a PHP page. So I make sure I go into the page properties of the page that my form is on and save that. Now my form is ready to go. And why would we save it as a PHP page? Because we're using the built-in PHP form processor. So that's it. Here's what's going to happen. If I was to publish this page, put it on my website, when someone fills out this information, I would then get an email that gives me all of that information, all of the data that they send me, and my user would simply be sent to a success page or a thank you page that says thanks for submitting your information. So there's a lot more to this, but I just wanted to make sure I covered the more common uses of building a form in 90-second. And since this video is really long, I'm going to go ahead and close it out for now, and we can make some other videos for more advanced techniques later. But for now, that's how you work with the form controls in 90-second website builder.